You were taught that freedom means choosing, to pick between this and that, to decide, to move as you wish. And so you grew up believing that your ability to select was proof of your control. But the truth is quieter, colder. What if the choices you make were already shaped long before you made them? What if the range of what you call freedom was drawn by invisible hands? Culture, conditioning, fear, and the need to belong. From the moment you were born, you were handed a script. You were told what a good life looks like, what success means, what love should feel like, and what failure should make you fear. Every goal you chase has been planted in you, whispered through parents, teachers, screens, and the silent expectations of everyone who pretends not to be watching. You choose, yes, but only from the options you were given. You mistake movement inside a cage for liberty. You decorate your walls. You name your habits independence. You convince yourself that obedience is personal ambition. And the system smiles, because the best slaves are the ones who believe they are free. You think you're escaping when you choose differently, but the system has already anticipated that too. It has built rebellion into the market, carved dissent into fashion, and sold you identity as a brand. Every time you believe you've found yourself, you've only entered another version of the same loop. You are not choosing. You are being chosen by design, by influence, by invisible architecture. The tragedy isn't that your freedom is fake. The tragedy is that you defend it. You defend it with pride, with certainty, with the deep conviction that you are your own master. That's how the illusion stays alive. It doesn't need walls anymore. It only needs belief. And as long as you believe, you'll keep walking the same corridors, proud, confident, blind. The illusion is not that you are trapped. It's that you no longer recognize the walls. Every system that claims to free you only changes the shape of the boundaries. You are told that you have rights, but those rights exist within a structure that decides what counts as acceptable, what counts as sane, what counts as success. You are told to be yourself, but every image of yourself has already been designed, filtered, and sold back to you through the glow of a screen. Freedom has become performance, a mask you wear to prove that you are in control while quietly obeying the logic of the crowd. You scroll, you post, you speak, and you believe that expression equals power. But power has never been about noise. It's about who builds the stage you perform on. Every opinion you form is shaped by invisible algorithms that feed your ego while shaping your reality. The more you feel seen, the deeper you sink into the illusion. This is how modern control works. It doesn't force obedience. It engineers agreement. You call it progress, but progress has become the softest chain of all. It gives you comfort instead of truth, efficiency instead of meaning, stimulation instead of peace. You think you are steering your life, but your hands are on a wheel that turns only where the road allows. The design is so perfect you no longer notice it. You have been trained not to. And that training hides behind every small satisfaction. The job, the phone, the validation that tells you you're enough. You're not chained by iron anymore. You're chained by incentives. You don't resist because resistance no longer feels necessary. The new prison is not the one that punishes rebellion, but the one that makes rebellion meaningless. And the more you accept the comfort of this invisible control, the less you remember what it means to actually be free. You've been told that the power to choose makes you free, but no one warned you how deeply choice itself can be manipulated. The world around you does not need to take away your freedom to control you. It only needs to shape what you desire. Every advertisement, every trend, every moral lesson, And every algorithm quietly whispers what to want before you even know you want it. You believe you are acting from free will, but your will has been sculpted from the outside, shaped by repetition, softened by fear, guided by the promise of belonging. When you follow the path everyone else walks, you feel safe. When you step off it, you feel lost. That is the quiet power of control, not to forbid, but to make you afraid of your own direction. They don't have to cage your body. They only have to condition your instincts. You obey not because someone commands you, but because disobedience feels like failure. You stay in line because deviation feels dangerous. You work, consume, repeat, and defend this cycle as purpose. You think the system is out there, somewhere, watching you, but it has already moved inside you, wearing your voice, speaking your thoughts, choosing through you. And in this subtle submission, you begin to forget what true freedom ever felt like. You think freedom means comfort, safety, approval, but real freedom is isolation, risk, and silence. It demands that you stand apart from the structure that feeds you, and that's why so few ever attempt it. To live freely is to lose everything the illusion gives: certainty, praise, belonging. Most people would rather live comfortably in the lie than face the loneliness of truth. The cage remains invisible because it promises warmth. And as long as you keep mistaking that warmth for life, you will never notice that the door was never locked, only feared. Control does not begin with commands. It begins with design. The world you live in is not a battlefield of freedom and domination. It is an ecosystem built to make obedience feel natural. Every rule, every structure, every expectation is crafted to shape your behavior without confrontation. You are trained to follow long before you can speak, taught to please before you can think, rewarded when you adapt, punished when you question. The genius of modern control is that it never announces itself. It hides inside comfort, convenience, and social harmony. You move through institutions that look neutral: schools, workplaces, digital spaces, yet each one is calibrated to reinforce the same reflex: compliance dressed as cooperation. The architecture of obedience is not built with chains, but with incentives. It teaches you to chase validation, to crave approval, to see authority as protection. You call it discipline, professionalism, maturity, but beneath those words lies the quiet machinery of submission. You learn to watch yourself, to edit your words before speaking, to calculate what version of you will be accepted. And that self-surveillance becomes your identity. You no longer need a master because you have become your own. The system has perfected the art of delegation. It outsourced control to your conscience. You feel guilt not for betraying yourself, but for disappointing the invisible expectations that rule you. You wear politeness like armor and call it morality. You trade curiosity for stability and call it wisdom. The architecture is elegant, self-sustaining, unbreakable because it no longer needs enforcement. You maintain it voluntarily. You teach it to your children, reinforce it in your friendships, uphold it in your silence. You have become both prisoner and warden, building new walls each time you try to feel safe. And in this delicate balance of fear and approval, obedience is reborn every day, disguised as choice, disguised as peace. Obedience begins long before awareness. It hides in the way you interpret safety, belonging, and success. From your first breath, you are taught that approval is survival, that being accepted means being good, and being different means danger. So, you learn to adjust. You learn to smile when you want to scream, to agree when you want to resist, to silence your truth in exchange for peace. The structure rewards that silence. It calls it maturity, professionalism, cooperation. But what it really demands is surrender. Every time you conform to protect yourself, the walls grow higher, stronger, smoother, until you no longer notice them. You don't need guards when the prisoners believe they deserve their cells. This is how control evolves. It becomes internalized. You start thinking like the system wants you to think. You discipline yourself, censor yourself, doubt yourself, all while calling it responsibility. You manage your emotions to fit expectations that no one ever asked you to challenge. The control illusion thrives because it feels like virtue. You work tirelessly to maintain the very mechanisms that drain you. You become proud of your restraint, loyal to your conditioning. The system doesn't demand force, it rewards predictability. It wants you efficient, agreeable, polite. It wants your creativity confined within the limits of what can be sold or admired. And you oblige, not out of fear, but out of habit. Obedience has become instinct. Even rebellion is anticipated, packaged, marketed, and sold as individuality. The architecture of obedience does not stand against you. It stands within you, in the patterns you repeat without question. You think you are choosing stability, but stability is just the name you've given to submission. Every time you defend what feels normal, you defend your own containment. And the deeper you live inside this illusion, the more you call it peace, not realizing it is only the silence of control. The final stage of obedience is not submission, it is identity. Once control moves from the outside to the inside, it no longer needs force to survive. You begin to protect the very system that confines you because you think it is you. You defend your beliefs not because they are true, but because they give shape to your existence. The structure of obedience is built from these attachments, the things you call values, principles, and normality. They are not lies, but they are not yours either. They are inherited, refined, and passed down by countless others who once believed the same illusion of control. You measure your worth by how well you follow the script, how well you stay in rhythm with the expectations that define your world. And when something inside you begins to rebel, the architecture answers not with punishment, but with guilt. You feel wrong for questioning, ungrateful for doubting, reckless for wanting more. That guilt is the glue that keeps the illusion intact. It convinces you that peace comes from obedience and that chaos waits outside its borders. You don't realize that the chaos you fear is the only place where truth begins. The illusion of control is so complete because it seduces you into loving your own restraint. You find comfort in schedules, titles, rituals, and predictable order, believing that discipline equals freedom. But order can also be a coffin, beautifully carved, lined with comfort, and sealed with pride. Most people never escape because they mistake obedience for purpose. They don't see that the system's perfection depends on their silent agreement, on the daily choice to remain safe instead of awake. The walls don't hold you anymore. You hold them. You reinforce them every time you follow the rules without remembering why they exist. And so, the architecture of obedience remains untouched, stronger than ever, because it no longer imprisons bodies. It imprisons belief. They tell you that you are free to speak, to express, to choose your truth. But they never tell you that permission has already been built into the language you use. Every word you speak has been filtered through unseen approval, shaped by what society allows you to say, what it rewards you for saying, and what it quietly punishes you for thinking. You live inside a vocabulary designed to keep you obedient while convincing you that you are brave. You don't feel censored because the limits are invisible. You have learned what not to say without being told. You sense when silence is safer than honesty, when conformity earns applause, when authenticity costs too much. That silent calculation is the real censorship. It doesn't need a dictator, only your fear of exclusion. The illusion of freedom survives through this unspoken contract. You may say whatever you want, as long as it changes nothing. Speak loudly, but never dangerously. Debate, but stay within the borders of what is socially acceptable. You mistake this containment for liberty, thinking that the act of speaking is proof of power. But power does not fear noise. It fears silence that refuses participation. The world does not silence you because it doesn't need to. It has taught you to police yourself, to trim your thoughts until they fit the frame of the collective. You believe you are expressing yourself, but you are reciting a script written by culture and fear. You don't lie to others. You lie to yourself by calling your obedience respect, your compliance tolerance, and your fear of rejection wisdom. Every system of control eventually evolves from domination to permission. It stops commanding and starts allowing, because allowance is more efficient than oppression. When people believe they have permission, they stop seeking liberation. And that is how control becomes invisible, when it feels like your own decision to obey. There was a time when control needed authority, kings, laws, punishments. Now it only needs consensus. The new masters do not silence you. They drown you in noise. They give you endless ways to speak, endless platforms to shout from, until your voice loses weight. You are told that you have the right to express yourself, but your expression has already been neutralized. You are allowed to vent, to argue, to feel righteous, as long as it all leads back to the same safe conclusions. You don't see how every controversy, every outrage, every trending cause is another mechanism of containment. The system gives you 1,000 ways to participate so that you never notice you're being managed. You think you are choosing sides, but both sides are built into the same design. This is the evolution of permission, not the freedom to rebel, but the illusion that rebellion matters. The language of control is not written in laws anymore. It's written in emotions. It makes you feel good for agreeing, ashamed for questioning, and exhausted for caring too much. You end up performing sincerity instead of living truth. You say what will be liked, not what is real. You seek applause, not understanding. And slowly, the truth dies in your mouth, replaced by polished phrases that sound virtuous but mean nothing. You think you're honest because you're loud, but honesty doesn't survive in the marketplace of approval. The cost of real truth is exile, and no one wants to be alone. So, you shrink your thoughts until they fit inside the comfort of the collective. You learn to speak carefully, to filter, to soften, to sound balanced, not because it's right, but because it's safe. This is how permission disguises obedience as wisdom. The system doesn't need to suppress you when you suppress yourself. It only needs to make you believe that compliance is compassion and silence is peace. And so, you become fluent in the language of permission, a dialect of control disguised as virtue. The cruelest form of control is when you defend the cage yourself. You have been taught to value the appearance of freedom more than freedom itself. You measure courage by how loudly you speak within boundaries, not by whether you are willing to break them. You celebrate the act of choosing within pre-approved limits and call it liberation. And so, the system thrives quietly, not by forcing your hands, but by shaping your instincts, your desires, and even your moral compass. Every compliment you seek, Every post you share, every agreement you offer is a brick in the wall that surrounds you. Permission makes you complicit. It disguises obedience as self-expression and convinces you that your consent is choice. The language you learn to trust becomes the very instrument of your containment. You no longer need chains because you police yourself, judging your thoughts, filtering your speech, censoring your impulses before anyone else even notices. The illusion of freedom is strongest when it is invisible, and you have become the perfect enforcer. You defend the rules that limit you, not because someone told you to, but because you believe that safety, acceptance, and recognition are more valuable than truth. And yet, there is a quiet awareness that grows in rare moments of stillness. A feeling that something essential has been lost in exchange for safety, that the ability to speak without fear has been traded for belonging. Real freedom begins where permission ends, in the spaces where silence is too loud, where courage has no audience, where choice is unshaped by the expectations of others. To live there is to risk isolation, shame, and judgment, and that is precisely why so few ever cross the threshold. But those who do see clearly the subtle power that rules most lives, and they recognize that freedom has never been given, only simulated, always measured, and always sold back to the willing. Freedom does not die with chains, it dies with comfort. You have been trained to crave ease, to value safety, to seek pleasure over truth, and in doing so, you have surrendered without noticing. Every convenience you embrace, every distraction you chase, every small compromise you justify builds walls you cannot see. The world tells you that comfort is reward, that stability is virtue, that pleasure is harmless. And so, you obey quietly, not because you are forced, but because comfort feels like freedom. You measure success by the smoothness of your life, the absence of resistance, the approval of those around you. But ease is an anesthetic, a slow method of compliance that numbs the mind and the will. Every distraction you chase is a thread in the web that holds you, invisible, unchallenged, unresisted. You do not notice how much you have given up because the trade feels natural. You sleep well at night. You feel secure in routine. You imagine control, and the system smiles. It does not need to dominate you directly. It only needs to make the alternatives unpleasant, uncomfortable, or socially costly. And so, your desire for comfort chains you more effectively than any command, more permanently than any law. The more you seek ease, the less you remember the edges of your own mind, the limits of your own will, the truths that lie beyond the soothing narrative offered to you. You think you are free because you can buy, scroll, move, and speak within this space. But that is precisely the point. You have traded the unpredictable, the risky, the unknown, all that makes freedom real, for a quiet existence that feels safe. The trap is invisible, and its grip is soft, and that is why it is so complete. The moment you begin to question, to stretch, to resist, you feel panic, shame, or exhaustion. And then you retreat, back into comfort, back into the illusion that you are free. The quiet power of control is most effective when it masquerades as kindness. Comfort lulls you into submission by making resistance feel unnecessary, unnatural, even foolish. You measure the quality of life not by truth or autonomy, but by how painless it is to exist within the boundaries given to you. Every convenience you accept is a silent agreement to obey. Every habit you cultivate is another brick in the invisible wall surrounding your mind. The system does not need to punish you. It only needs to reward your compliance with ease. Your life becomes a sequence of small, comfortable choices, each one reinforcing the next, until you forget what it means to act freely. You rarely feel the weight of your chains because they have been disguised as pillows. And when you sense the stirrings of discontent, the urge to break free, the voice that reminds you there is more beyond routine and approval, you hesitate. Comfort has made doubt dangerous, not physically, but psychologically. It whispers that risk is foolish, that isolation is unbearable, that suffering is pointless. You shrink your ambition, dull your curiosity, and soften your defiance in exchange for the warm glow of stability. And yet, in that very glow lies the subtle theft of freedom. You are free to move, to speak, to buy, to enjoy, but only along the path that has been carefully prepared for you. The more comfortable you become, the less you notice how little of life you actually shape yourself. And the more you defend this comfort, the stronger its grip grows, until the cage is invisible, unquestionable, and complete. True freedom is not easy. It is not safe. It is loud, painful, and isolating. But comfort is seductive, and few dare to pay the price of reality. The most dangerous chains are the ones you cannot see, the ones that feel like warmth, protection, even love. Comfort teaches you to obey without thinking, to accept without questioning, to trade courage for ease. Every time you reach for distraction instead of insight, every time you choose routine over risk, every time you silence your instincts in favor of convenience, you reinforce the subtle architecture that controls you. It is a slow, quiet entrapment, invisible because it feels like care. You measure life by how smooth it is, how predictable, how painless, and in doing so, you surrender the parts of yourself that define true freedom: curiosity, rebellion, and the willingness to face discomfort. The system doesn't need to dominate with force. It only needs to make discomfort appear dangerous and inconvenience unbearable. You trade autonomy for safety, thought for habit, reflection for distraction, and you call it living. And yet, in those fleeting moments when you feel the stirrings of dissatisfaction, a thought too wild, a desire too bold, a need too urgent, you sense that freedom has never been about comfort. Freedom begins at the edge of fear, at the point where comfort ends, where routine fails, where the familiar is abandoned for the unknown. That is why few ever experience it, why most never leave the soft cages they build themselves, why the illusion of freedom is so complete. The walls do not scream. They whisper, and the whispers lull you into obedience. You are not imprisoned by strangers, but by your own craving for ease. And the deeper you sink into that craving, the farther you drift from the possibility of choice that is real, raw, and unshaped by design. The cage of comfort is subtle, seductive, and silent, and it is the most enduring of all prisons, because the prison is within you, and you defend it with every decision, every habit, every comforting thought that makes resistance feel unbearable. The cruelest trap is not the one imposed by the world, but the one you carry inside yourself. You look in the mirror and see freedom, independence, autonomy, yet every reflection is filtered through expectations you were taught to internalize. The beliefs you hold, the judgments you make, the decisions you justify as your own are often echoes of voices that shaped you long before you could reason. You defend your identity, your choices, your morality, without realizing how much of it is borrowed, copied, and conditioned. The system does not need to enforce obedience when you have learned to enforce it on yourself. Every compromise you accept, every fear you obey, every desire you censor quietly teaches you to monitor your own behavior. You become the warden of your own cage, policing your thoughts, managing your impulses, and justifying every small act of compliance as necessity, wisdom, or virtue. And the most tragic part is that you do this willingly. You mistake your reflection for truth, your adherence for integrity, your silence for judgment. You protect the very rules that limit you, the very scripts that confine you, because they feel like you. Real freedom has never been as simple as acting without constraint. It begins with seeing the cage inside yourself, recognizing the invisible walls you defend every day, and understanding that the sense of choice you cling to may be nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. And yet, most people never look that closely because the act of observation itself threatens the fragile identity they have been taught to call self. To question it is to risk everything, and that risk feels unbearable. So they continue, blind, proud, convinced that the reflection they see is real. The mind is a master craftsman of illusions, and the most dangerous is the one you call self. Every habit, every belief, every moral code you cling to has been shaped by forces beyond your awareness. You think you act from choice, but your choices are often prescripted by fear, by desire for approval, by patterns you have inherited without examination. The reflection in the mirror convinces you that your actions are independent, yet independence has become a performance, carefully calibrated to fit within expectations you cannot see. You edit yourself constantly, judging thoughts before they emerge, modifying behavior to avoid discomfort or rejection, and all the while telling yourself you are exercising freedom. Obedience has become second nature, hidden beneath layers of identity you defend with pride. You justify compliance as maturity, silence as wisdom, compromise as pragmatism, and in doing so, you unknowingly reinforce the invisible walls that contain you. Every rationalization, every comforting narrative, every self-proclaimed truth acts as another mirror, reflecting not who you are, but who you have been conditioned to be. And these reflections are addictive because they promise certainty. They make you feel whole, coherent, moral, in control, when in fact you are dancing inside a carefully crafted architecture of expectation. The more you identify with this reflection, the less you see the chains around you. Your mind polices itself so thoroughly that no external authority is needed. Even rebellion is anticipated, softened, digested into the system before it can emerge. And so, the illusion of freedom becomes complete, not because it is enforced, but because it is believed. The cage is internalized, invisible, and defended with ferocity, while the truth, that freedom requires doubt, discomfort, and confrontation, remains terrifyingly distant, a risk most are unwilling to take. The harshest prison is the one you willingly maintain, convinced it is sanctuary. You believe that your choices, your judgments, and even your doubts are your own, yet they are shaped by patterns that were crafted long before you could question them. Every moment you defend your habits, every instinct you suppress to conform, every thought you edit to fit expectation, you tighten the invisible bonds around yourself. The system no longer needs to enforce control externally, because you have absorbed it into the very fabric of your identity. You call it personality, character, or discipline, and so the cage wears the mask of virtue. True freedom, the kind that exists beyond influence, beyond comfort, beyond the need for approval, requires a confrontation with yourself that few dare to face. It demands that you recognize every subtle compromise, every act of self-censorship, every false conviction that has been handed to you and defended as truth. To stand outside this reflection is to see how much of what you call self was designed for compliance. And yet, that recognition is terrifying. To break the cycle is to risk alienation, shame, and the disorientation of existing without the scripts you have relied on all your life. Most people retreat from that terror, choosing the familiar illusion over the unknown reality, defending their self-deception as wisdom. But those who confront it, who face the mirror with honesty, begin to sense the contours of authentic freedom. They see that the real power lies not in comfort, not in applause, not in the permission they were granted, but in the courage to question the reflection itself. The cage does not vanish with awareness, but awareness is the first step toward reclaiming autonomy. And in that quiet confrontation, the illusion begins to crack, revealing that the freedom you believed in was never absent, only obscured, waiting for those willing to see beyond the mirrors they polished themselves. Freedom is never given, and it is never easy. The moment you recognize the illusions that have shaped your life, the comfortable narratives, the invisible walls you once called normal, you realize that escaping them demands more than courage. It demands a reckoning with yourself. Every instinct you have been trained to trust, every habit that once felt like security, every belief you clung to for identity, is suddenly a potential barrier to authenticity. To walk beyond the familiar boundaries is to step into uncertainty, to embrace discomfort, to accept the possibility of failure, rejection, and isolation. You cannot ask for guidance, for maps, for approval. There are none. Those who remain inside the illusion will call your rebellion foolish, reckless, or cruel, because they cannot comprehend a world where freedom is lived rather than approved. And the cost is immediate. Peace, comfort, certainty, all the things that once made existence bearable, vanish. The mind resists with every tool at its disposal: fear, guilt, distraction, rationalization. It whispers that the familiar is safety, that the unknown is danger, that the old routines were wisdom. And yet, the deeper truth calls you forward. The chains that bound you were never outside. They were woven into your own beliefs, your own habits, your own illusions of choice. To escape, you must betray them, dismantle them, unlearn them. This is not a painless transformation. It is violent in its necessity, painful in its clarity, exhausting in its demand for attention. The world you knew will no longer exist the way you imagined, and the world that awaits is silent, unshaped, unwelcoming, but real. Real freedom does not comfort, it challenges. It does not reward, it demands. It does not reassure, it awakens. And for those willing to pay the price, every small act of rebellion, every uncomfortable decision, every deliberate choice becomes a fragment of life reclaimed from the shadows that have long governed it. The true cost of freedom is measured not in money, comfort, or approval, but in solitude, uncertainty, and the relentless confrontation with your own mind. When you step away from the illusions that once guided your choices, the support structures that gave life meaning begin to crumble. Friends, routines, beliefs, and even self-images are tested. You realize that everything you trusted was intertwined with the system that controlled you, a system that thrived on your compliance and your silence. And suddenly, the consequences of independence are clear. You are alone in your decisions, unprotected by collective validation, stripped of the comforting narratives you once defended. Every step toward autonomy demands sacrifice. The predictable, the familiar, the agreeable must be abandoned. The instinct to retreat is strong. It whispers that you can reclaim peace by returning to obedience, by resuming the scripts you once lived without question. But the mind that has glimpsed its own chains cannot return to ignorance without pain. Each compromise, each act of conformity now feels like betrayal, and the cost of continuing the illusion grows heavier with every passing day. To escape is not merely to reject the system. It is to confront your own conditioned instincts, the habits that have become part of your identity, and the illusions you told yourself were freedom. You will feel fear, doubt, exhaustion, and despair, because autonomy demands that every choice is earned through awareness and courage. And yet, it is only in this space, isolated, raw, and unshaped by external expectation, that you can begin to understand what it truly means to be free. The illusion falls away gradually, painfully, revealing the contours of a life that is yours to inhabit alone, and in that revelation, the cost of freedom is fully realized. It is everything you thought you were, stripped away, leaving only the raw, unfiltered truth of your existence. The final truth of freedom is brutal. It cannot coexist with comfort, consensus, or certainty. The deeper you walk into autonomy, the more you confront the illusions you once cherished, the familiar walls you once defended, and the invisible chains you once called choice. There is no applause for leaving obedience behind, no reward for facing the emptiness that follows the dismantling of your conditioned life. You are left with yourself, unmediated by culture, expectation, or the reassuring narratives you relied upon. Every decision becomes real, every consequence unavoidable, every act entirely yours. The illusion of control dies in this confrontation because it can no longer hide behind comfort, routine, or self-deception. You are no longer guided by the scripts, the permissions, or the approval that once shaped your existence. It is terrifying because with freedom comes responsibility, not just for survival, but for the truth of your own mind, the raw landscape of choice unbound by influence. The price is high because it demands that you give up everything that made life feel easy and familiar. But in that surrender, in that confrontation with raw reality, you finally see the architecture of your own obedience, the mirrors of your self-delusion, and the seductive trap of comfort for what it truly is. You understand that the freedom you believed you had was only ever a shadow, a carefully curated illusion sold to you by forces you barely noticed. And yet, standing alone in the vast, uncertain space that remains, you feel the first stirrings of something real, autonomy, unshaped by fear, unfiltered by expectation, unsold and unclaimed. True freedom is not easy, safe, or admired. It is raw, isolating, and eternal. And for those willing to pay its price, it is the only power that cannot be taken, the only reality that cannot be stolen, and the only life that is fully their own.